I just started talking in the middle of your yawn. All right. All right, hello and welcome into our Corn-Fed Sports in the Morning here for our Monday morning session. We're going to do 5 shows in 5 days this week, so we're getting back to the regular grind. So we're just going to jump right in. Today we have a 2-segment show set up for you, so we got a little special football preview in our second segment. We're going to start with the Corn-Fed 5. So, Gage, why don't you just get started on our Corn-Fed 5 big topics for the day.
All right. Going first, for our first Corn-Fed 5 is we're going to talk about Jordan Burroughs. Jordan Burroughs won his weight class at the U.S. trials, beating Kyle Dakey, whom is a 4-time NCAA champion. He's a great wrestler. So Jordan improves to 56-0. But Pat, kind of leading into that, what does this mean for Jordan, and where does he go from here after beating Kyle Dakey, going into international competition?
I think the big thing for him on this is not just that he qualified and not just that he made it through other trials, but just what he did for the event at that weight class. I mean, you look at all the guys that come in, David Taylor, a guy who we battled with, the 4-time champion, and the guy who just won a Hodge Trophy who wound up making it to the finals. Obviously, Burroughs headlines any class that he's in, but that people were talking about that coming in, they're making a big deal out of it, and then just come out and the first one, it's a best of 2, it's a best 2 out of 3 setup. So he comes out, first match, gets the technical fall in the first period, 7-0, just storms out. I mean, you saw everybody. It's a Friday night, but you still see people in the Twitter world, people in social media, people in different things talking about just how dominant it was, how nobody can really handle it, how he's too fast and those little things. Then he comes out, and it's you knew that after the first one that there's going to be some adversity. Obviously, anybody coming off a technical fall is going to be competitive enough to bounce back. But it's kind of the same way. There's the team in the NCAA tournament, the number 1 seed, the number 2 seed, something like that. They go down in the second half. They go on a 25-0 run. They wind up winning the game by 15, 20 points. It's one of those type of situations where he had his back to the wall. He needed a late takedown. He needs something like that to try and bounce back and get into the match. He gets it. And then going into overtime, if there's any doubt in your mind that he's going to win in overtime, then he's going to take that. I mean, that was basically just done before it even started. So to come out, to bring hype to the weight class, to do something like that, and to take on somebody who's one of the 3 4-time champs in NCAA histories and just dominate him right away and just send a message right away is huge for him. It says something about his ability to perform on the big stage, obviously undefeated on the senior level and some of those different things. So I think just a performance like this, an effort like this, and a showing like this just not only does that for himself, but it shows, obviously his big goal is to save Olympic wrestling, to make a name for the sport and do some of those things. So he's got it sewn for the 2016 games, but it's still a few years away. If you see that kind of momentum, if you see the trials over the next couple of years heating up this way, if you see that Burroughs is able to carry the sport like this and make other weight classes interesting, make other people want to be alongside of him. Everybody talks about how he's the undisputed face of the sport right now, and so just for him to be able to perform like this on a stage like that, bring more relevance to that weight class and do some of those things is just big for his development in that sport, as well as just showing that Nebraska plays a big role in the international wrestling scene.
Moving forward now, we're going kind of switching gears, going from wrestling to track and field. With it's kind of the same thing though, international success being the name of the game. Current Husker Chad Wright, he won the discus at the Jamaican Nationals and then got 3rd at shot put. Other Husker athletes, Jessica Furlan, competed at the Canadian national team. Go ahead and talk about the international impact for all of our Husker athletes. Just they seem like we have a huge, broad grasp of international athletes in the Husker athletic. You just go talk about that.
Yeah, especially in track and field. I mean, obviously you can talk about them in all different sports. We're just going to focus more on the track and field people for today. Chad Wright goes out there and he wins the discus at his event and then shows well in the shot put. You have other guys like Dexter McKenzie getting a top 10 finish in the 200. And you have past guys, in the jumping events, past jumpers from the Huskers in the United States and
Dusty Jonas,
in the Jamaican, Nicholas Gordon getting second there. So you have guys all over the board just kind of competing. But what it does is it shows that on that international level, that when people see it, I mean, track is a weird sport like that. The people within the sport are the ones who see it. The kids who are 10 to 18 that are going to grow up, that could be at trials, that could be pushing for some of those spots. They see those guys, they see some of that kind of stuff. So if you see somebody making a big throw like Chad at the discus at the national championship, the Jamaican national championship,
right.
and you kind of follow his path. And he won the NCAA national championship for discus last year, won the Big Ten shot put this year. So when you're at some of those events and you make waves, people say, "Oh, what's he doing?" He also won a national title for Jamaica. He did some of those things. It not only brings visibility on that end and exposes Nebraska and gives it something else to talk about, but it also has a little reverse effect there as well. That people at that event that may be looking for colleges, that might have younger siblings, that might be working with younger athletes, they see that, and then you look at it even on a different level. That people who look at it from the outside, young Americans who will see Chad at international competitions, that'll see other Nebraska people represent Olympics and things like that. When you have people from those smaller countries who are able to represent on the international stage, it draws the people in your home country. It draws your home track athletes to want to do some of those kind of things. And so I think that having people who are representing the Huskers at those events can not only add to what people think of this program, but people from the outside on all levels and all national teams, if they see Nebraska people at international track events, they're going to think that's a place where I can go and I can become a world champion. That's a place where I can go and I can develop myself for my country later on. And so just being able to have Nebraska people there and have them represented is a huge deal, because it develops your name of people who are already there and it brings more people into your program.
Absolutely. And you ask those guys, they are very proud to be Huskers. So when they go to those international competitions, they're representing us as Nebraskans. So that's very good. But sticking with the international theme, moving on to basketball now, Siobhan Shields, for who you guys didn't see, he competed. His mom is actually Danish. He's from America, but he competed for the Denmark U20 team, and he led them to the Nordic title. They faced teams like Estonia, countries like that. He averaged just over 13 points a game, but Pat, going into this basketball season, everyone's talking about the new guys, and it's almost like people like Siobhan or like a David Rivers, they're kind of forgotten. Kind of talk about that and Siobhan going into the next 3 years.
I think that's one of the biggest things that you miss in times like this, and that's one of the things that you don't see, especially in the world of college basketball, where everybody's talking about recruits, everybody's looking ahead, everybody's saying, who do you have coming up? And where the people who necessarily just score the points, the people who necessarily come up in big games are the ones who make the headlines all the time. So I think that a player like Siobhan Shields, obviously it's a big deal to go out in a double overtime championship match representing. Obviously, from Kansas City to Copenhagen, it's kind of
a little different.
It's a little bit of a jump, so nobody's really expecting it. But to see somebody on any sort of national team level being able 17 points, 12 rebounds, coming up big, competing against other guys who are, it may not be true international competition, but it's pretty close.
Those guys could be professionals.
And they could, and they can move on. You're going to see some of those guys obviously move on to senior national teams at some time. So just to see them come through right there just kind of reminds you of what we all saw last year. And everybody talks about Ty Webster, they talk about Walter Pitchford, they talk about Trump Headway, they talk about all these new guys coming in. Not a single one of those guys had 29 points in a Big Ten game last year. And so
as a
freshman. And so some of the things he did, obviously puts in 33 points total in the 2 games at the Big Ten tournament and some of those little things. And so he's one of those guys that you don't really realize that college basketball players may be born and created in the AAU scheme and done some of those things on some level. But the great ones, the guys who win championships, the guys who make big impacts come tournament time and clutch time, are the guys who are there for 4 years and who work hard, the Brandon Ubells of the world. And so Brandon Ubell was here at one of the times where people would say it was an up-and-down struggle. It was things that weren't working as well as it could have been. And when he comes out on the other end, and you see the praise people had for him last year about how he came out the other end of the Nebraska program. You see somebody like Siobhan Shields, the new coach with Tim Miles, that has already done things and already bought into the program and been kind of that gritty number 3, 4. He flex inside and out, but he'll get those rebounds, get those tough points when you need it. If you just give that guy a few years playing in this conference, playing against those top teams, playing against guys who are going to the NBA every single year, you're going to see development. You're going to see some, he may not have the best physical gifts, he may not have come in with the most impressive skill set, but he's going to develop. He's going to keep getting better. He's already scored double-digit points, 20 points, 29 points. 7 double-figure games last year as a freshman. So just a lot of those things are going to carry over. You're going to see, obviously, you see the leadership on display on the national team level. So just Siobhan's going to carry all that into the next year, and I think you're going to see a team leader develop from that spot over the next couple of years.
He might be the glue going into the next 3 years to hold that team together. But We'll have to move on from. I wish we could talk about Siobhan more, but we're going to move on. Going into Husker golf, actually, we don't talk about Husker golf all that much. But
and this one did slip between the cracks, so we're getting to it a little late, but we're getting to it.
We're a little late to this, but former Husker Brandon Crick, I'm sure a lot of you guys saw, he competed at the U.S. Open. He didn't make the cut, but it's great that you can see a freshly former Husker golfer compete at the highest level of professional golf. Pat, you have a lot of experience with Brandon, actually. You covered him since he was a freshman here. Old man Pat over here. But anyways, just talk about what do you remember about Brandon, and maybe go talk about what this means going forward.
It was golf. Weird for me just seeing all of it at first. I mean, obviously you see the names, you're like, oh, Husker made it to the golf here. Wait a second. Brandon Crick, he's pretty recent. And then I remember, and I look back at some of my stories, and I remembered who he was, and I actually have some of my old audio tapes saved, and so I didn't crack into him yet, but I remember talking to him, and I looked at a couple of my old stories. And the thing that I think stands out, not just about Brandon, but about the Nebraska golf program in general, is that obviously they're not pushing for conference titles every year. They're not winning the number of tournaments that a lot of major schools are doing, and that just comes down to talent and athletes and getting golfers in the state of Nebraska, where it's not always the best conditions.
We actually have winter here.
Yeah, so makes it a little bit tough. But there have been guys like Crick, a guy who started at Gonzaga, comes back and transfers back to his home state of Nebraska and is able to win a tournament here in Nebraska, was able to be kind of that diamond in the rough, compete at the NCAAs and some of those little things. So I think obviously you're never going to, in any of those sports that people deem the non-revenue, kind of the smaller sports, you're not going to really be hell-bent on championships and performances and winning and just necessarily all those kind of things. But to see individuals come through like that, and that they always talk about the process, they always talked about how many shots better you can get, that in all of his interviews, he was the one who was just the first guy to say, hey, we left a lot out there, and we knew that we could do a lot better. And even him leading the team, putting up top 10 performances, doing those kind of things, he was always the guy who would answer for it and say, we can do better. I know that I can do better. I know that I could win this tournament for this team, and that those strokes could help the team overall. And that he'd be the first guy to say, if our 3 and 4 guys are cutting strokes down, we're going to do a lot better. So it's just to see that kind of attitude, and it's not as big of a deal. obviously national teams, international competition like the track and field, there's a little bit of a bigger stage. But even on this stage, to see a golfer, to see somebody on the women's side as well that's making it through the ways, that men's, women's golfers, men's, women's tennis players, those kind of sports, to be able to push people into a new level, I think is big for the Nebraska sports. So just to have somebody represent on that professional stage is really big, and just those are the kind of things that help those programs.
And I think you can relate the difference that men's golf with baseball is, and we have winter, so they don't get a golf year round necessarily. So for him to make the U.S. Open at a very tough Marion course, very good for him. Good job, Brandon. Now we're gonna switch gears, go to football talk. Actually, a little different though. We're gonna talk about the NFL since basketball just got over. We're gonna talk about NFL. Pat, I got 2 questions for you. It's a two-part question. Out of the Husker class from last year going into this coming football season in the NFL, who is your breakout player? It doesn't necessarily be a rookie. Maybe he doesn't started, but who is your breakout player next year in the NFL from Nebraska?
And I'm glad we get to actually talk a little football here now and move on from the professional sports world. I mean, the jump from basketball to football is one of my favorite, and so you get to think of all the hype, and obviously going into training camp, you have some of those things.
A month and a half left.
These are about as precautionary as you can get, and you're going to find out they're about as safe as you can get as well. So I'm going to stick with my defense. I'm going to stick with both guys who I've covered as well. Okay. So I'm going to start with my breakout player. And he did well last year. I mean, obviously playing in championship games is a big deal, but I'm going to pick Alfonso Denner for this one. Okay. And because, they got some moving around in the system that last year everybody's worried about what's going to happen at this legal state and all those little things. And
he got past it.
He made it through it. He took the blame for it. He took the credit for it. I know he's the kind of guy who's going to say that he can only get better, and so he's going to show up to training camp with that chip on his shoulder.
Absolutely.
The only place that he can really perform past us, the only way that he can really make a new name for himself is go out there and perform on the football field. And he's still doing the same things. He's still making people's day by playing with them on PS3 and some of those little things. You can still see he's still got the same confidence, still got the same swagger that he's always had.
Yeah.
And so I think when you put him in that system another year where he's learning from the people around him, has some defensive backs moving around, they're not sure who's going to be there, but he's one of the guys who they know they're going to have to count on. I think when you give him time in that system, he's athletic enough. He's got that playmaker gene in him. So I think that when you see somebody like that in a system like that, especially if New England may not be putting up as many points with some of the injuries and situations they're dealing with on the offensive side of the ball. So they might need to be a little bit more defensive.
They also have a guy named Tim Tebow, do they not?
Please do not. We will not talk about Tim Tebow.
Okay, all right.
So we'll move on now that he's brought up that name. So
I just
Alfonso Denner is the breakthrough Husker in the NFL.
Just to add, he didn't start at the first part of the season last year, but he came in really quick. I mean, he's going to be great, I think. He'll be a long-time NFL player as long as he stays healthy. But moving on from that, going from your breakout player, let's go to who of the former Huskers, there's a lot of them in the NFL, who's going to have the best overall season next year?
Just so I didn't pick a kicker. I mean, normally I just go and pick kickers, and that's my number one.
We got a couple in there.
That's my number one go-to. But just so I don't pick a kicker again, talk about kickers one more time, I'm going to go with, again, probably the safe pick, but the guy obviously who makes the most headlines of any of the former Huskers, and that's Sue.
Yep.
So I'm gonna stay interior, and it's because the last couple of years they've talked about how he's got Van Bosch around, and they talk about Cliff Averill and some of those guys who were making plays. Yeah. They're gone, and so they're out. They got some younger guys. They got Jason Jones. They drafted Ezekiel Ansah and Devin Taylor.
Fairly.
The inside guys who are developing coming next year. So he's got a tandem inside with another guy who played in the SEC. So he's got, obviously Sue's a machine. He's a beast. He can do it all. But he's got some more athletic guys around him who are going to open up some gaps. And before, if you got strength, you can double Sue and just hope that you can power through one of those guys. But with athleticism, with just that energy, you're not going to be able to hopefully send as many guys his way. So I know you're a Lions fan. You're kind of reserved about me, picking good things about your team. So we'll have to handle that another one because we're already running out of time. But just getting it under the gun, Sue is who I'm picking to be the best Husker in the NFL to represent this next year. And I think you're going to see some pretty crazy things go on.
Alrighty. So, well, from moving on from that, we're gonna take a quick break here, and we'll come back here. We got a really fun segment coming up.
NFL Street fans, get excited. We're going to mix up Husker football a little bit. So we'll be right back after the break.